Hello again, everybody. Hey, congratulations. You are about to retire.
You talking to me?
Okay. Not you, Robert De Niro. Not talking about you, but I guarantee somebody out there is going to retire within a few months, if not a few days. And even if you are many years away from retiring, I think you're going to really pick up some useful nuggets of information in this episode that I would urge you to put in your hip pocket and pull that back out someday in the future as you start to think about retirement, because this is very essential, what we're going to talk about today. It could really keep you from making some major mistakes right on the eve of retirement, because it's all about trying to have the most successful years of retirement that we can have for ourselves, right? And how do we define success? I think the simplest explanation is simply don't run out of money. Right? I think that's the best way to put it. So what we're going to talk about is to make sure that we don't, no matter where you retire in the economic cycle. So if I were to ask you, what do you think the most important factors are in determining a successful retirement? Some of you would say, well, maybe inflation. That's a big one. How about returns? Just your annualized returns. Obviously, there's a big difference between averaging 3% for the rest of your life versus 10%. Those things are very important. Absolutely. If I were to make a list of top 10 most influential developments in retirement from a financial perspective, those things would be the top 5, but they wouldn't be number 1. The most important thing that you need to keep in mind for as you're about to retire is also something that you have no control over it. And I think that's what makes this so unnerving. But there's still a way that we can guarantee some sort of success, even with things that we don't have control over. What is that number 1 factor? Timing. Timing. When did you retire in the cycle of the stock market, the bond market, the economy? Now, you don't know it at the time. It's only going to be many years down in the future when you look back and say, wow, did I retire at a great time? I didn't know. Or on the downside, I couldn't have picked a worse time economically and financially with the global markets than what I did. For example, let's take a look at the chart right now. I'm picking out a 10-year look back that starts at about 2005 and goes to the end of 2015. See that big crash right there in that colored box? That's the S&P 500 dropping like a rock. That is the so-called Great Recession or Great Financial Crisis. The S&P 500 fell about 55%. The worst crash in the history of the market outside of the 1930s, the Great Depression. That was painful. A lot of us lived it. What if you had retired right there at the peak in late 2007? Unbeknownst to you, everything was about to crash and burn. Here's the problem. Not only has the market crashed, but there's a good chance that in retirement, you're also pulling money out of your portfolio. That's one of your income sources, right? You've got Social Security, maybe some other things, and you are needing that portfolio to give you some sort of a return most of the time. Well, if the market's crashing and you're pulling money out, let me tell you something. There's a chance. Now, I know that's an extreme case, but there's a chance if people retiring in 2007 never got back to where they started with as they were digging that hole. And digging that hole deeper to get out. It never works well. Now, I'm going to come back and talk a little bit in a few minutes about how to avoid that if that were to happen. But before we do that, let's talk about the good side of things. Through no skill of your own, you may retire at the best time. Let's go back to the chart and we'll update it a little bit. We'll move it forward a number of years, and you can see now we are starting with the Great Recession. What if you retired right around the bottom there on the left? I know people who did. Man, have they been living the great life of retirement, because look at the rest of that chart. That's one of the best long-term returns in the history of the stock market, and people, like I said, through no skill of their own, retired at the right time. They have been living their best life. So, over something that you have no control over, what can you do? Well, here's what all of you need to do, especially if you're close to retirement. But this is true for everybody. People in retirement, people many years. I do this for my own portfolio every year, and that is simply this. Conduct a stress test on yourself. You take your current portfolio, how it's allocated, and drop it 25%. I mean, just like that, right off the top. What if it declines 25%? How does that change your life going forward? If you are about to retire and a 25% hit happens, and all of a sudden you realize, well, then I don't think I can retire. Well, then your goals are out of whack. You're either going to have to continue to work. Maybe your return expectations are out of whack. Something is wrong because you in retirement, you should still be able to maintain your lifestyle even in a bear market. Now, a stress test, you can look this up on your own. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but it's called Monte Carlo analysis. We do Monte Carlo analysis. I do it on myself. We do it for all of our clients, no matter where they are in life every year. In fact, here's a quick little snapshot of a portion of that. This is literally a 60-page report. So I am just showing one small little picture on one of the pages. But this is a real life example. This is an investor's portfolio plugged back into that late 07 to early 09. What would have happened to that model allocation if we had put it in a time machine and gone back more than 15 years? Well, they would have lost 19.3%, the first really bad leg down, and then an additional 7% roughly. On a cumulative basis, that is a decline of about 29%. Now, that's good and bad. You say, what's the good? Well, if the market was down 55% and that investor was only down 29, you could say on a relative basis, that's pretty good. But people don't care about relative performance when you're down 29%, right? That's the bad. Oh my gosh, I just retired. I'm pulling money out and I'm down 29%. Now, one of the things you have to keep in mind is in the midst of a crash like that, you are probably making some changes along the way. Your advisor should be getting a little bit more defensive. So maybe you wouldn't be down 29%, but you'd still be down. Can your portfolio survive it? Let me give you a little piece of advice here. This goes back to something that I had teased a few minutes ago. One of the ways to guarantee that you're going to be okay in retirement, if worst case, you end up retiring at the peak of a major bear market is, does your plan work if you're only pulling out dividends? That is probably the most important question I'm asking all of you right now. Because even in a bear market, virtually most blue chip companies will maintain their dividends. Very rarely will a company cut the dividends. But if you're spread out and you're diversified, even if one or two companies do it, you should be okay. Go and look at Dividend aristocrats. That's not a buy, sell, or hold recommendation. I'm not going to come up with any specific names, but conceptually, that's what I'm talking about. These are companies that have raised their dividends typically 20, 25 years consecutively and longer. In some cases, there are companies to this day who have raised their dividend for more than 50 years in a row. So that means even during corrections, crashes, bear markets, these companies have continued to raise their dividend even as their stock price might plummet. This is what we focus on in retirement. So yeah, it's a gut punch, I know, to lose something dramatic like 25 or 30% right after you retire. Nobody wants that. But at least in the early years, if this occurs, and you're just living on dividends, you will survive. You will get through that, but you won't know that unless you conduct a stress test. Look, corporations do that all the time. In fact, in the banking industry, they are required to do it. They are mandated by the government every year. Every financial institution has to do a stress test to show if we have an '08 again, we are okay because our capital requirements are such that we're going to survive. Do it for yourself. And if you conclude, if I were to fall that much, I can't make it, then you can adjust now as opposed to having to go back to work when you didn't think you'd have to do that after retirement. And let me add one more thing, that one of the things that people get wrong too is they put their portfolio together right as they are about to retire, is they'll look at what analysts are predicting, what the market's about to do. Don't look at that. In fact, I recently did a podcast on that very subject to talk about the fallacy of the folks who are actually making market predictions. Don't fall for that. It will set you on the wrong path. I hope that helps. Please, as always, remember to subscribe to this channel. And if you feel like somebody you know could benefit from it, also forward that along to them as well. Make it a great one, and we'll talk to you again next week.